Okay, Dad, today is Monday, June 24th. It was a pretty interesting weekend, and not in a good way. A lot of things happened. I'm thinking where we could start maybe will be with Russia and Ukraine. Um, basically, we'll just call it what it is. Basically, there were two Western-led terrorist attacks, essentially, in Russia. Well, one in Dagestan, where an Orthodox priest and some parishioners were murdered. A synagogue was also attacked. Um, and the people are saying this is another. It's very reminiscent of the Crocus City Hall attack of ISIS-K and all this. And then in Crimea over Sevastopol, there were a bunch of beachgoers, a bunch of civilians and children playing on the beach, and a U.S. ATACMS missile tipped with cluster munitions exploded over the beach, and killed, I'm not sure how many, I'm seeing five or six children,
Well,
and 150 plus injured. Five or six dead, and most of those, I believe, are children. So, anyways, just to start it off, are these two events linked? And then you tell us about what happened and your analysis of
okay.
the situation.
All right. Well, they might be, but we have to be careful about jumping to conclusions. Okay. This, we don't know exactly, we know what happened, but we don't know, who was behind it, what were the motivations. I think we have to be very careful about that. Let's first look at the attack in Dagestan. There was an attack on, I think, two Orthodox churches. And in one case, the priest, an elderly priest, had his throat slit. He was murdered, in the church. I don't know that any parishioners were killed. And then, in addition, there were several police officers that were killed in two different towns in Dagestan. And this seemed to be a very well coordinated attack. The attackers seemed to be quite well trained, disciplined, actually, unlike the attackers in the Crocus City Hall. Um, and they've all been either captured or killed at this point. But it went on for a while, for hours. There were gunfights, and um, they did a great deal of damage. I think it was approximately a dozen police officers that were killed. Now, I think we need to look at point out some of the differences between this attack and the Crocus City Hall. Um, First of all, there are at least some, if not all, of the terrorists. This clearly was an act of terrorism. Were local. In fact, two of them were the sons of a local official. And that local official has since, I think, been detained. He may have had nothing to do with it, but clearly the police need to investigate, see what's going on. So you had local people involved, and they were attacking, churches and a synagogue. It seems to me anyway that this could be, you know, um, um, a locally based, terrorist action, by some jihadists, extremists. Those are the kind of targets that they would choose. These are an affront to Islam. This is what the way they think. Um, and that's really very different from what happened in Crocus City Hall. Crocus City Hall, first of all, the perpetrators were um, very poorly prepared. They were not disciplined. They didn't seem to have been trained to any significant degree. They were actually outsiders. They were Tajiks. You know, um, and they chose a target. We have every reason to believe that they were initially going to go after this very well-known patriotic singer, and it was going to take place right before the Russian election. I mean, again, everything about this kind of smells of Ukraine intelligence, and to me. And then, of course, later we had more information. They were fleeing towards the border with Ukraine, and then later the Russian investigative authorities found other links to Ukraine. Um, so it was, yeah, the kind of the target that they chose, the symbolism of it seemed to all things that would really matter to Ukraine, right? They were doing what they could to undermine Putin's authority. But this I think it's possible, it's quite possible that this was simply a jihadist attack that was carried out for jihadist reasons. Now, of course, you're right to be skeptical about that because the U.S. Has a long history of supporting jihadists, going back to, 1980, the support for the Mujahideen against Afghanistan, and it really ever since. So the U.S. could have been behind it, but I don't see the fingerprints on it at this point. Now, maybe, when the Russians do their investigations, they'll find them. But at this point, I think we have to say that at least it smells like something local.
But what's the
And
motivation? I mean, why? I mean, it's not like Muslims are being persecuted
right,
in Dagestan. There doesn't seem, like we talk about like Chechnya, of the
right,
Muslim center of Russia, how much they love Russia and Putin.
right.
So why? Where is
Yeah.
this coming from?
Well, it could be. I mean, well, first of all, of course, it could be Western backed, but then you may have people that are actually, extremists who have a kind of a vision of a pure Islam that don't like the assimilation, they don't like the friendship between, the people of Dagestan and the rest of Russia. It's conceivable, it it doesn't seem to, yeah, it's all in all, it's Dagestan has been fairly peaceful over the last, to my knowledge, over the last decade or so. I mean, the early 2000s, there was a fair amount of violence. I don't know why it would start out, but I guess I would just say that again, that you can't, we don't want to make the mistake of assuming that everything's done by the evil puppet master. There could be local agency here. I think there's at least a
Hmm.
degree of local agency here. It's quite possible that there are, malcontents that wanted to do this, but they got some extra training and support from the West. That may be what happened. But again, we'll let the investigation go ahead. Now, in the case of Crimea and the attack of missiles, I think it's important to point out, what actually happened. There were 5 missiles that were fired, according to the Russians. 4 of them were destroyed, and the fifth one was was either hit or, maybe through electronic warfare means was caused to deviate from its intended trajectory. So anyway, it was diverted. And then it blew up over the beach and scattered debris. And I guess also, cluster munitions. As you were saying, it had a cluster munitions warhead. Anyway, if those were the initial reports coming from the Russians from RT, and if that's true, and I haven't seen anything to contradict it, that means that likely the beach itself was not the intended target. So we have to look at least at the possibility, because that would do the same. These things have happened going the other way, where either Russian missiles were actually diverted by Ukrainian air defense and ended up hitting an apartment building, or maybe the Ukrainian air defense missile fell on the apartment building, and then the Russians get blamed. I think we have to apply the same standards of truth here. Um, so it looks to me like that beach itself was not what was intended, but it was. It seems that all 5 missiles were heading towards Sevastopol, and to my knowledge, Sevastopol doesn't have any military targets. The Navy's been moved farther east, out of range of these kind of missile strikes. Um, so it seems quite possible, likely, and certainly, what we know of the Ukrainians, and their Western supporters, it's very possible that they were intending to hit some other civilian targets. I don't know of any military targets that they could have hit within Sevastopol. Um, maybe
Wait,
they
well,
were
I'll
going to go
just
after something symbolic. That this is something that happened just a year ago, roughly. They hit I think the former headquarters of like the Black Sea Navy. It wasn't
well
being
just
used, but they hit it in Sevastopol.
to
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
push back a bit. Isn't there some air base that wasn't too far away from the beach? Could that have been the intended target? I heard there was a military
Okay.
air base not too far away.
Well, that could have been. I actually didn't hear about that. But see
Hmm.
that we just have to be honest about this, that it could be, it's conceivable that they weren't
Right.
going after a civilian target here. I mean,
Okay,
again,
so
it's sort of
but
like but we also have to say that the Ukrainians do have a history of striking civilian targets. I mean, they've done it hundreds of times, and like in Donetsk City, and there was in the strikes on the Christmas market in Volgograd, where there's nowhere, and other strikes within Volgograd where there's just nothing. There was nothing but civilian, and same thing in Donetsk City. They clearly were intentional strikes on civilian targets. So I think it's a mistake, or I think we have to be honest and say we don't know for sure that they were trying to strike a civilian target, but it's certainly very possible. Maybe more information will come out. Maybe we'll learn what the trajectory of these missiles are. These are ballistic missiles, so they have pretty much a fixed trajectory. And I suppose it's possible to, figure out exactly, where they were intended to land.
Okay, so you're saying though that it's highly unlikely that the beach was the intended target.
Right.
I mean, there's no military strategic value of striking a beach full of beachgoers.
Right.
It's not a military base, and I think something that we could say is different between the shelling of Donetsk or Belgorod with artillery shells is that those don't require Western satellite guidance or U.S. intelligence to operate that. What happened here with the ATACMS and a very firm statement from Lavrov saying that this is a U.S. attack. He wants to blame the United States more than the Ukrainians on this, saying that this was an attack guided by the United States. We input using our satellites, input it in. Maybe Ukrainian pushed the button, but it was all authorized and approved by NATO or United States intelligence.
Yeah.
It's a big escalation, but hopefully, but like I said, hopefully, we will find out that this wasn't the intended target, and maybe it will help dampen things down. But Lavrov gave a very firm response right after this, saying that the U.S., there will be an answer, that the U.S. is at fault for this, and we will respond. Scary. Yeah. So what does that response mean? What do you think it could mean?
I don't know. Just to be honest, I just don't know. There's one thing. It seems like, a possible response would be to actually go after U.S. drones over the Black Sea. Again, there are reports that there was a U.S. drone in the vicinity of this strike. And we know for a fact that, that they're used in targeting. I believe Lavrov, I've heard on this, I've heard other reports that also state that, these ATACMS systems required, U.S. targeting and operation. I know it's definitely true for other missile systems, and I've heard it's true for ATACMS too. So I don't have any reason to doubt that the U.S. was involved. Now, they may not have been intending to get a beach, but it seems like they were firing missiles into, a large city or in the vicinity of a large city in the middle of a Sunday. If anything, if nothing else, it was very reckless.
What has been the U.S. response to this so far? I haven't heard much coming out addressing this incident.
Yeah. Well, I think I've heard the first time that U.S. authorities were asked about this, they said that they basically no comment, and then later they made a statement that, as always, we always regret civilian casualties, and that's all they said. It was a very general kind of statement.
Okay, so you think we'll see?
But it was even worse with the European. I think it was the EU foreign policy spokesman said that he basically didn't believe the Russians. They must be lying about children dying. I think the actual statistics are that 4 were killed on the beach, 2 of them were children, 151 were injured, but some of them very seriously. So hopefully they'll survive.
I heard 4, and then I heard that it got up to 5 or 6, but I don't know. This is so recent. Like I said, it's easy to jump to conclusions. I do that much more quickly than you do, so I'm glad you pulled me back and say, let's take a step back. Right, because I get on Twitter, I'm like, whoa, it's getting crazy. World War III,
Right. Well, I've seen a
coordinated.
lot of statements from
And
people I respect, saying that just flat out the U.S. is behind both of these. I think you can pretty much say that, yeah, no question the U.S. was involved in the attack and strike. Um, um, but that they were intending to hit the beach, that's a separate question. And it's not justified by what we know so far. But we just don't know if the U.S. was involved. Of course, we have a right to be very suspicious because of this history that they have of of associating using jihadists, but we just don't know.
yeah, yeah, I mean, the Russians have to be out for blood, though. I mean, if you're
Yeah,
seeing this, first of all, they see, the Crocus City attack was horrific, right in their capital city in Moscow. That wasn't that long ago, what,
right.
3 months ago or so. And then, these attacks into Belgorod, which are Russia proper, like you said, striking the Christmas night market and killing civilians there.
Yeah,
Beachgoers, one of the
right.
victims, one of the children
Well,
that
yeah,
died
part
on
of
the
it,
beach
like
was,
all of these, whether it's intentional or not, and a lot of these past attacks clearly were intentional. You just never get a peep out of the Western media. They just ignore it. Which tells people, tells Russians, they really just don't care about Russian lives. They just don't. These are just not
or
worthy of
Ukrainian lives,
consideration.
clearly.
Yeah,
2,000 Ukrainian soldiers were dying a
well,
day in the past week.
yeah, right. Well, not certainly not Ukrainian soldiers. If
Mm.
yeah, but
Yeah, I heard one of the victims on the beach was the daughter of a mayor of some Russian city in the eastern
uh-huh,
province, a 9-year-old girl.
yeah,
And yeah, and I just started making me think about like when there's a terrible incident that happens in the United States and gets plastered all over the news. It really stirs people up, and
yeah. Well,
but
yeah,
and
think
so
about it.
imagine
Right, right,
what's
right.
happening in Russia. Russian media is
Yeah.
hearing this, like you see an image of these children being killed, a night market getting bombed, the
Hmm.
Crocus City Hall where 100 people get gunned down, that are just shoppers or attending a concert. And then, seeing, what happened in Dagestan. It's just
Hmm.
the amount of anger that must be
Right.
building up in Russia
Yeah,
to do
I think.
something is going to be
Yeah.
high. And if we spend a little time to just put the shoe on the other foot and think about what if this was happening here in the United States? What if we use the example of if Russia was supplying missiles to the cartels in Mexico, and they would be shelling, El Paso or something like this, and kids were being killed with weapons that were, being sent from Russia, or Russian guidance, being all fully backed by Russia, we would have bombed Moscow to the Stone Age. We would have nuked them by now. If this was happening the other way around. So I think
Right.
I know people can get caught up in the war, but it's very important to try to empathize,
Yeah.
to try
Yeah.
to think about like, what if
Yeah.
this was happening to my country, to my people?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
No. No.
and
It's. There's no question about it. I mean, that's it's. Um. And if in the end, also, yeah. I mean, it's hard to see like what clearly the Ukrainians have been striking civilian targets. We don't know exactly what went on, this last weekend, but clearly they have. And they give it, the reason is they're trying to destabilize Russia or, what um, cause the people to lose their faith in their leadership and so on. And that's not what happens. It never does. This kind of terrorism always backfires, and it just makes people a lot of times who may have been opposed to the war, didn't have any strong opinions, they end up becoming firmer supporters of the war. They say we've got to you know we we've got to carry this through to the end. These people are crazy. I've had enough of this. And
mm,
then you get
yeah,
people who are a little bit more intemperate saying things like we've got to flatten Kiev. Or now I fortunately we have a very cool cucumber at the top. But but he does. That's Putin, of course. But he does have to take into account, this feeling, this growing anger. That's something that he can't ignore.
mm, yeah. I mean, these types of attacks also just reek of desperation from
Yeah,
the West. It's just like what you can't actually beat the real army, the Russian army. So you're going to have to go after civilian population centers, because you can't actually, you can't beat Russia head on. And if you can't beat Russia head on, then it's just like clear, well, negotiate, stop doing
Hmm.
this. You have to reach a peace. Let's just stop the bloodshed. We can do it. There was, the a peace proposal put there. You may not like it, but that's fine. You state your position. Russia stated theirs. At least start talking, and you can
Uh-huh.
try to come to some compromise and agreement. I'm sure
Yeah.
that there's going to be some wiggle room going both ways if they actually talk, but there always is.
Right.
But we but now it's just disgusting that it seems like the U.S. and the Ukraine, NATO, they are resorting to essentially what we can call terrorism now, right? I mean, is that fair to say? Like that's what we've devolved into. Like
Yeah.
the greatest army in the world,
Yeah.
NATO and the United States, we have to launch attacks into civilian infrastructure because we can't even have any effect
Right.
moving the front line.
Well, okay. Well, again, we'll say that we don't know for sure that this was directed against a civilian target, right? This most
Okay,
recent
well,
one.
what about in
But
like Belgorod
yeah,
before, and
okay,
them
that was
saying
a
that we can
right.
launch
That was a
attacks into Russia?
vampire rocket system, which is checkmate. Now, I don't know if like the Czechs were involved in targeting an operation of the system. I just don't have any information on that. It's possible that the Ukrainians just did this on their own. I think you have to say, like, when you look at, in the shelling of Donetsk, and um, it's possible that this is done, by the Ukrainians just by themselves without Western encouragement or,
Yeah, but there are
involvement.
shells, are
Yeah,
backing. I
well,
mean,
that's right. Okay, well, it's our weapons, especially like with these. I never heard anything from the Czechs, after the Christmas market attack. There should have been some firm denunciation and say, this is not what this was intended for. This was we're supposed to be defending Ukraine, not killing innocent Christmas shoppers in Belgorod. But they never said anything. That's right. And when a lot of these other attacks have happened, you get these leaks, for example, in the New York Times or the Washington Post, weeks or maybe months later saying, oh, we didn't want them to do that. And it's sort of some wringing of the hands. Um, and yeah, maybe they didn't, but they let them do it. And they obviously don't prevent them from doing it again. And so they're, no matter what, even if they're not like directly involved, if they're not directing these attacks on civilians, I have to say that they're complicit. They're supplying the weapons, and they're maybe telling them, oh, don't use these, on attacks against Russian civilians or any
Mhm.
civilians. Maybe they actually say that, but then the Ukrainians ignore it, and then they give them more weapons. So what does
Right.
that
They
tell you?
didn't.
It's sort of like the U.S. and Israel too.
I
It
was
just,
just going to say
right,
exactly right.
right,
We say, oh, we're concerned when they drop a 2,000 bomb on an
right,
apartment building, and that's it. I mean, but we'll keep on
right,
giving you weapons. Oh, but we're very
right.
concerned about
Right.
what's happening
Yeah.
here.
So even if
Um,
they're not, it's not like, maybe the U.S. didn't actually choose a civilian target and encourage them. Probably not. Probably not. I mean, there are probably some crazies in the U.S. like Victoria Nuland who would if she could get away with it. But they let it happen, and they facilitate it. They in the end they're guilty. I mean, it's just like they maybe trying to achieve some sort of separation between themselves their Ukrainian proxy, but it's not real. It's phony.
mhm. Well, something that's also been an interesting development just in terms of the political winds in the West is that both Nigel Farage in the UK and Trump recently has stated that, well, the cause of this war is NATO expansion. And it seems like that's been received quite positively from, that's actually been a good position to take. Is that your analysis as well? What do you think about Trump and Farage making these statements?
Right. Well, I think probably within their respective populations, yeah, I think a lot of people believe that, um, and or are open to that idea. Within their respective elites, establishments, definitely no. This is outrageous. You can't say this. Um, Now, in the case of Trump, yeah, he said it. Actually, you sounded almost like a John Mearsheimer, just maybe 40 IQ points lower, but he was kind of
Way more
laying
than
out
that.
his position. He was, I'm not saying that he was, he just, how he talks, but what he
Yeah.
said was true, and he demonstrated a basic understanding of what happened, and that's great. It's just unfortunately Trump is just not reliable, so I just refuse to get excited about it. And he said that that's wonderful, but will he back it up? I think almost certainly not. We'll probably have Mike Pompeo back in there, or somebody like that, and there won't be
Well,
any change
we'll
in
see.
policy.
We'll
But at
see. I
least
don't know.
just the fact that he says this, it's good.
I
It gets out
I'm
there
just
and
going to
people hear it.
I'm just going to say, yeah, I think he's surrounding himself with some better people, obviously Vivek. But for example, where he said that, I listened to this podcast, the All In podcast. It's with David Sachs, who has been on the Duran. I think you've probably heard David Sachs on the Duran before.
Mm.
And Duran, he's a big listener to the Duran. But David Sachs had this giant fundraiser for Trump. And it seems like, he has Trump's ear a little bit. And David Sachs is very smart when it comes to these
Mm.
issues. He basically has the same positions and come to the same conclusions that we have.
Uh-huh.
And he had Trump on his podcast.
Okay, well that's
So
good.
that just the fact that somebody like David Sachs has his ear is a slightly reassuring, but of course, how many people have his ear and are
Right.
competing? And it seems
Yeah,
like
because
Trump,
right.
his
Yeah.
policy depends on who he talked to last.
Yeah, that's
It's so,
exactly right. That's exactly right. He probably, he was talking to David Sachs, and yeah, I'm just going to be very cynical and say that if Trump is reelected, and it looks like he probably will be, that we won't see a significant change in policy. It'll be the same thing. We'll just have some more entertainment. Well, a different kind of entertainment from what we're having now. But
yeah. Oh
I,
man,
I really
another.
wish. No, I'd love to be proven wrong. I really hope. Maybe if I'll wait until I see some of the appointments. Starting with the vice presidential one. That's supposed to come up within a few days. I think
Yeah,
maybe
he
at the
says he
debate.
selected him. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
right. That should give us a sense of where he's going.
right. I mean, I heard JD Vance is in the running, as well as Vivek. I think both of those people could really maybe
Uh-huh.
make a difference.
Yeah.
We'll
Well,
see.
Vivek, especially J.D. Vance, occasionally does, step out and dissent, on foreign policy. Maybe he doesn't. He's very cautious about it, but he does dissent from time to time. It's in a significant way.
Hmm. Right. He had a paper that he published. I think it was posted in the Washington Post or something about just the math doesn't add up with this war
Yeah.
with Russia.
Right.
That we just
Right.
simply don't have the capability to produce the munitions. So what are we doing
Right.
here?
Yeah. No,
Which
no,
I
it's
think
important to have people
level
that
of
have
realism.
who have a grip on reality, and that's what we don't have right now. So that would be a step in the right direction if you had somebody like
Mm,
J.D. Vance in office.
okay. Yeah, it's good. I think this is going to be a very interesting week. We're going to have, I think, a response from Russia soon for what happened in Crimea, and then let's move over to the Middle East. I think that we are looking at Israel is getting ready. That prediction of that the IDF might invade Lebanon before the presidential debate on Thursday. I still think that's very much in play. I've heard that Israel is moving troops up north. And I heard a report. I don't know if this is true. I see things on Twitter. You can tell me. It says Israel allegedly told the United States about plans of using unprecedented weapons in the event of an all-out war with Hezbollah to get it resolved as quickly as possible. That's what I've been seeing and
Mm.
hearing. And what does
Yeah.
that mean? Is that a threat
Yeah.
of using nuclear weapons? And when I think about it, it makes me think this makes sense. I think Israel knows that they have, if they're going to do this, they have to hit really hard, really fast,
Uh-huh.
to try to get the upper hand. Because, like we've gone over this, Hezbollah, they're not a pushover. This is not going to be something where that
Yeah.
will end well with Israel. And maybe Israel's thinking like, okay, well, we got to do this, so
Right.
we're doing it all. This is it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I didn't hear that comment. I know I've heard people speculate that they might use a tactical nuclear weapon. I, you know,
If
They're,
they do, what would
yeah,
happen?
I have trouble believing they would do it at this point, but who knows? It seems like they already have to be crazy, or at least have um, some kind of plan. Yeah, they intend to use force on a scale that we haven't seen before. If they really are intending to go into Lebanon, because everybody's predicting that this is going to be a mess, this is going to be a catastrophe for Israel. If they've convinced themselves that they somehow believe that it won't be, then maybe they are contemplating the use of. I
Would they
still find it hard to
nuke
believe.
Beirut?
Yeah,
Could that?
I still have trouble believing that. I mean, it
I mean,
just seems to me that
what's the point
that's
of
a
a
real
nuke?
right there. It's a desperation move, right? Yeah, one thing is like, okay, it would make more sense. Well, if you're fighting, um, a state actor, that has, large military bases, you can take out an entire military base with a tactical nuclear weapon, or an airfield or whatever, so that it could just never be used again. Um, so that it does have some sort of practical value in warfare when you're fighting a state actor. But I don't see what the practical value would be in fighting Hezbollah, which doesn't have any, large military bases. It's dispersed, it's underground in tunnels, throughout southern Lebanon. Um, I, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they're intending. I really have no idea. I have no idea what's going to happen. Um,
Okay, well, do you have any updates on just in terms of deployment of troops and forces? I've heard that the we're sending an aircraft carrier to the region right now. What are some concrete things, not speculation, that we
right.
see Israel doing in
Okay, well, yeah,
preparation
well,
for
I've
this
heard
war?
that, well, it's the Eisenhower, carrier
Mm,
task force was actually withdrawn from the Red Sea and was heading into the Eastern Mediterranean. And um, it's not clear if maybe, in order to support Israel, if they go into Lebanon. That's certainly what some people are saying. Others are saying that it's actually going to head back to the U.S. We'll see. And then I know that I think the Eisenhower is being replaced by the Roosevelt task force. This is coming from farther east. So they're going to continue to have a presence in the Red Sea. Um, yeah, the I know that some number of governments have advised their citizens to leave Lebanon. So it's clear that there are a number of governments in the area do believe that war is imminent. Um, so it still looks like it's going to happen, but I don't know. Yeah, nobody's explained to me how Israel is supposed to actually succeed in this war. It, of course, it's been a long time, 18 years since the last one. That went badly, but things have changed. I'm sure that the Israelis, spent a lot of time analyzing their failures, and maybe they've come up with some, new approaches that they think they're going to be successful. But I can't imagine what they were, what they are, because, you know, you see how they've been struggling in Gaza against a much weaker opponent. Um, I don't know. It just the whole thing seems kind of crazy to me. Maybe the whole point of it is to get in there and flounder and force the Americans to come in.
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to say. It said you like, well, what's the plan? Are they going to win this? Well, I think it's clear. It's to have America do it for them,
Uh-huh.
and we probably will. We probably
Yeah.
will,
Well, I
but
think
I
it's
don't
even
think we will win,
right,
though. That's
right,
the thing. I think
right,
that's where they're underestimating. I think they're
right.
underestimating America's ability to defeat a force like Hezbollah as well,
Mhm.
and without it being incredibly messy. And you're going to have riots on the street here if you're going to try to get. Maybe you can even speak a little bit on the current state of the United States military. We've touched on this multiple times, but just about how we're depleting our stockpiles so quickly. These, sort of long time military families are no longer signing up for the military. How bad of shape are we in right now, the U.S. military? What are we capable of
Yeah.
doing?
Well, we still got a lot of guns. We're capable of causing a lot of damage. But yeah, our stockpiles have been depleted by the Ukraine war. And then on top of that, the war in Gaza. Um, Yeah, and we just don't seem to have the surge capacity, like that clearly Russia does have. The surge capacity is the ability to expand production rapidly. You have a lot of, maybe mothballed factories or whatever, and when the need arises, you turn on the lights and you start cranking out things. But we don't have that. We have these. We haven't been preparing for a real war against a real, a peer adversary. Um,
Are we
and
capable of waging a real war? Like that's kind of my
I
question.
I don't think we are. But a war of attrition, no. I mean, we could inflict a great deal of damage on, let's say, infrastructure in any country, over the course of a month or something. But it even probably past that, we'd run out. We just don't, we just don't make nearly the enough missiles and munitions to really to prosecute a long-term war. And then the army itself, I think there may be a total of 500,000 enlisted men and women. There's actually a growing proportion of women, like men in particular, are just not signing up. They've been falling short in their recruitment goals. Um, you have these 500,000, but we also have at least 800 military bases around the world and all these different commitments. So we just have a limited ability to commit to any one theater. We take like the Russians have 700,000 just in the SMO area, and they're not all of them are fighting by any means. So just a fraction of those are actually on the front lines, but they have 700,000 just in that area. Now we have 500,000 for the whole world. So um, yeah, no, we're not prepared to fight World War III. Let's just put it that way. Certainly
Hmm.
not prepared to wage war and actually in any one of these theaters for a long period of time.
Even a
Certainly
short period
not.
of time,
Yeah,
that's something that I think I want to bring up again that we've mentioned before is that the U.S. Lockheed Martin can produce 550 Patriot missiles a
right.
year. In one day, on December 23rd of last year, Ukraine fired 480 Patriot missiles to stop a barrage of like 200 cruise missiles from Russia. 480 Patriot missiles in one day, and that's almost our whole year's supply that we can produce. So
Yeah,
we're sending all these missiles to Ukraine. We're sending them to Israel. How many do we have? We send them to South Korea, Japan. I've actually been
yeah.
hearing we've been telling Japan, South Korea, hey, can you give some of those back
Yeah, well, they're
so we can
pressuring the
send them over?
Europeans. Yeah, they're pressuring the Europeans to, and then the Europeans are saying that now they only have like 5% of what they need to protect their own territories.
Mm,
So, clearly we're scraping the bottom of the barrel and we're, sacrificing capabilities that in normal times, or certainly in any real war would be absolutely necessary.
right.
Yeah, with that, yeah, as far as the Patriot missiles go, yeah, 550 a year. That's our current capability. Um, Now, Russia apparently fires 4,000 missiles, like over the last 12 months, has fired 4,000 missiles into Ukraine. Now,
Hmm.
you generally use two Patriots for
Right.
every one incoming missile. So they would need 8,000 missiles, which, by the way, cost at least $4 million dollars a piece, to deal with the Russian arsenal, with the and so they're not even close. We're talking
Right.
about 1/16th, and that's just one theater, right? So that
Right, and
just
you
gives you a
talk about
sense,
Hezbollah. They supposedly have 150,000 rockets, is what I've
right?
heard.
Yeah, I don't know
So
if
what?
anybody knows, but I've heard that, and most people seem to agree that they have at least 100,000. Yeah,
Right, and then of course, if we want to talk about China, then the sky's the
yeah,
limit when we go to China and
right.
their ability to produce and scale up. So it always comes back to the same question. It's just like how stupid is the Pentagon and the establishment? Like, why are we doing this? Why are we
Yeah,
provoking? We wouldn't last a week if World War III broke out.
yeah,
And then all of a
right.
sudden, you're not going to get enough men to sign up. You're not going to have enough munitions to even fight the war. You don't have any defensive measures anymore because you squandered them all over the world in Ukraine and Israel. So what's the calculation? Why are we doing this? Why is this
Yeah,
happening?
right. Well, I think, in the case of Israel, it seems clear that we don't want to be there. I mean, we want this to end, or at least, the current administration does. They don't want it to expand. They did what they could to prevent it from escalating, between Israel and Iran. But so, that's one thing. They don't want to, and I think they probably are. Uh, the majority of the realists are actually in the Pentagon because these are people whose job it is to understand equipment and balance of forces and all that. I think it's long been the case that actually the real ideologues are in the State Department, just don't have any sense of what the nut and bolts problems are. And they just kind of assume that there's really no limits on American capabilities. But I think the Pentagon, or at least a number of, a lot of people there do realize there are limits, and they are, um, they won't go openly against the civilian authorities, but they're probably telling them privately, hey, our abilities are limited. Um, yeah, the problem in the case of Israel is that we just can't say no to Netanyahu. We don't want this to happen, but we just think we can't say no. In the end, it's just the tail wagging the dog. And so this is something that clearly is not in our interest, but we're just going to go along with it because we don't ever want to be accused of not supporting Israel. And then I think in the case of Ukraine, there are a number of ideologues who just, anti-Russian fanatics that just let their hatred of Russia get the better of them and took us into this war that's in the end, it's going to strengthen Russia and weaken us, but they just can't get past their own hatred.
Mm. Yeah, what scares me the most is that if a wider war breaks out in the Middle East, or we get dragged into the beginnings of what we might call World War III, if Israel's stockpiles, munitions, and the U.S. munitions run out so quickly, they might feel pressure to use nuclear weapons
Yeah.
as early, because they're like, oh, damn, well, we have to win this war. There's only one option on the table because
Right.
we can't win a war of attrition. We don't have the productive capacity that
Right.
Russia and China have, but we got these nukes. And so
Right.
let's
Right. I
use them
think that,
now.
yeah. No, I think
You
that's a
know.
real danger. That's right. I think especially in the case of Israel there, that if they start to, if they do launch this war against Lebanon, and if it goes catastrophically badly for them, they're, and places like Tel Aviv and Haifa are severely damaged. Again, think about the reaction that the Israeli population had to the Hamas attack on October 7th. We're seeing the consequences of that. That's not quite a nuclear weapon, but it almost is. This would be,
Mm.
like potentially 100 times that. And it may be that in the Israeli, the way of looking at things, this is the time to use them. We can't
Yeah.
because our very existence is under threat, and so let's
Right.
push the button.
Yeah, well, that's why when I saw these rumors flying around Twitter, there might be complete bull crap, about Israel saying that they will use unprecedented weapons in the event of an
Uh-huh.
all-out war with Hezbollah. But but the thing is, why it scared me so much is that it made sense to me.
Mhm.
I could see that reasoning, just like we said, they feel like they have no option, and so they got to do this quick, and so it scared me. I
Yeah,
just was thinking like the odds of a nuclear weapon being deployed to me just over the past week just have gone up to where I'm like a coin toss of whether a nuke will be used this year.
yeah. I wouldn't say we're quite there, but it's a realistic possibility, especially
Mm.
if this
Well, if a war breaks out with Hezbollah, maybe they don't use it at first, but as we said, they
yeah
will quickly be put in that position where the state of Israel will be threatened, and they will feel like this is the Samson option. They'll have to use it. I think
yeah
I was if a wider war with Lebanon and Hezbollah breaks out, I think the likelihood of Israel using a nuclear weapon is going to skyrocket to where it could be
yeah no
I
yeah
could think a
right
greater than 50% chance. And the
yeah
likelihood of Israel doing this to invading Lebanon, I think, is very high. I was
right
just actually, I know this is AI and it doesn't really amount for much, but I was using Perplexity AI yesterday, and I just, it's a real time AI service. If anybody wants to use it, they can check out my website, noflisky.io as well, to use it.
excellent. It
But
really is. I'm not lying.
yeah, I know. I'm very proud of what I built.
Yeah,
It is
right.
very cool. So anybody that wants to check it out, it'll save you a lot of money, and you can have access to all the top AI stuff, not just OpenAI. So I was Perplexity, anyways. is real-time web browsing AI. So I said, based on all the news within the past 24 hours, what do you think is the likelihood of Israel invading Lebanon? And it said, based on what I see now, I put it at 65%. Of course, that's just AI, but I thought it was kind of cool. I'm like, hey, that's probably what I would have said too.
Yeah,
That I'm at this point.
right. And that's
Um,
probably what I would say too, about two-thirds, that's
right.
and again,
So,
I'm just relying on these reports, but it's just I haven't seen anything to contradict them so far. Sometimes we can get real close, get right up to the edge, and then something happens and they call it off. It's just like the U.S. makes some kind of promise or whatever. So we can't ever be sure, but it's sure. At the present time, events are kind of hurtling in that direction, and it looks likely to happen.
right. And if it happens, then like you said,
Yeah,
what do you think of
yeah,
the likelihood of the U.S. using? I mean, not the U.S., Israel using a nuclear weapon. I think
yeah.
it's very. I would put it at greater than fifty
I think
percent.
it, right, right. I think it's very high. If it, again, especially if these population centers are hit, I think it's very high.
Well, boy, that's crazy. That I just when you hear about nuclear weapons, it's just history book stuff. You never think that it's actually going to happen.
Right.
But I'm at this point where I'm like, I think it might happen
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah.
I like when I said a coin
Right.
toss and he said no, but just the fact that you say that it's 65% chance as well of a wider war, and then once
Right.
that happens, greater than 50% chance, we're getting pretty close to a coin toss here, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I'm not going to give a percentage, but
I'll do
it's
it.
okay. But it is, yeah, it's way too high. I mean, in general, I mean, just looking at both conflicts, we are closer, to some kind of nuclear conflict than we have been in a long, long time. Probably since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah, yeah, and. Yeah, unfortunately, we just don't have. Back then, we actually had grown-ups in power who understood the realities. There were hotheads and people that really wanted to go for it. Now, we have those people, but then we have just this sort of uh, what you can say, just sort of this apathy or just a general lack of seriousness within both the media and the political establishment. So you see all these statements like whenever Putin says, "Hey, this is serious. This could end up in nuclear war." It's not threatening, like I'm going to use nuclear weapons, but look, this is serious. We're a nuclear power. You're a nuclear power. We got to be careful. We can't escalate. It's just that the response is always Russian talking points. It's just not. In the old days, we didn't love the Soviet Union, but we just understood that, yeah, a conflict with them could lead to, global disaster, the end of humanity. So we just have to tread carefully and take things that they say seriously. And now, but it's like it's your duty if you're going to be part of the mainstream media in the West. It's your duty not to take things that Putin says seriously.
Right.
That's just supposed to say, ha ha, you're supposed to sneer at him, you're supposed to deride whatever he says. And, that whole attitude is just makes the situation much more dangerous. It just kind of, um, yeah, I mean, you always had the hotheads, but then you had a lot of serious-minded people who, they were no fans of the Soviet system, but they understood what was at stake. And they, at various times, put the brakes on, people like John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. I'm not particularly big fan of either of them, but they had a very firm grip on reality and they understood what was at stake and they took steps that moved us away from the abyss. And I just don't see anybody like that in the West right now.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the situation in the Middle East is the scarier situation because, like
Yeah.
you said in the beginning, Putin is a very rational actor, and he's not a hothead. He's a cool cucumber, as you said. He's not somebody that's just going to they're going to have an emotional response. He has to handle with the population of Russia having an emotional response to what's happening in Russia right now, and he's got to monitor that. But he himself, I think, is not somebody that's just going to like, okay, we're going all out. However, the Israel and the U.S. are, especially
Uh-huh.
Israel.
Yeah,
Israel,
Israel.
I
Well,
think.
okay, yeah, there are people in Israel, I think, who would clearly welcome some kind of apocalyptic conflict. And I mean, they're not just a few guys out on the fringes; they're right there in Netanyahu's coalition.
Mhm.
And Netanyahu's the kind of guy who could go along with it too. You know,
Yeah, no, it's there.
and,
There's a real
right,
apocalyptic element that is
right,
strong in Israel. People need to
right,
understand that
right.
they believe that this is a holy war and that this is. I even see it in some of the comments of our videos that we do. We'll have a couple videos that will go out, and then you see a lot of these comments on saying like, this is God's purpose, this is God's plan. That evoking a greater power for the destruction of Gaza, West Bank, Hezbollah. It's scary, and so that's a very you can't reason with that type of thinking. Like
Hmm.
you can't really give a rational comment back and expect it to get through. So that's scary. If Israel does use a tactical nuclear weapon in Lebanon, what will happen? What's next? Tel Aviv, Haifa, wiped off the face of the earth
Yeah, but by whom it would be, they would have.
by Hezbollah itself.
Well,
You
yeah,
use a
right.
tactical nuke, you're not getting Hezbollah. You might
Yeah,
destroy Beirut
right.
and kill a
Well,
million
yeah, what,
people.
right,
But
right. Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, that's, by conventional means, could wreak, from what I hear, if they indeed have the 150,000 missiles, a lot of them quite advanced, they could wreak terrible devastation on Tel
people from
Aviv.
Egypt
Yeah,
and
what,
Jordan pour over
right,
the border. Like
right.
it's
Yeah,
all
that's right.
hell will break loose.
That's true. Yeah, yeah.
Iran
And
sending in drones. They've both shown they can strike
right.
Israel
Yeah, that's
already.
right. That could be the, well, I don't know. It
And
could be
they can
right there. That
I
would
think
be just
Israel could
plunge the
be
whole region into into war,
right.
and it could very well be the end of Israel. The scary thing is that if Israel sees that its end is near, a lot of people are going to be flying out, even before it happens. They already are, right? They're leaving. But those who remain may say, okay, it's time to just send the nukes to all the targets that we have, designated on our maps. Um,
Right. A lot of people will die. A lot of innocent people will
yeah,
die. But the end result will be that Israel will be destroyed. It will not exist anymore after this. I'm fairly certain of that. And even with US backing, it could happen so quickly that the US couldn't even do anything about it. I mean, think about if Hezbollah with 150,000 rockets, Iran with how many, even more sophisticated missiles, it's over. Like if a nuke is deployed,
okay, it hasn't
it's
happened yet.
it hasn't happened.
I
I'm
know.
just going down this because
Right.
it's a very real
Yeah, right.
hypothetical
No,
now. Like
no, I agree. You're not talking about something, it's a far-fetched fantasy. It is, we are approaching, the edge of the abyss here, and it doesn't mean that we're going to fall over. Things can happen, just like, um, who knows? There are always sudden turns and unexpected events and consequences.
look,
It may not unfold the way we expect it will, um, but everything that you're talking about is realistic. It's just something that could unfold over the course of the next several months. It could.
what would happen? I almost feel like this may not happen. Maybe it won't happen this year. Could happen in the next week, even two
Yeah.
days. Who knows? But I think the course that Israel is on, this is going to be the inevitable end. I don't see it changing. The end is going to end. It's going to end badly for Israel if they
Yeah.
stay on this current path, and I don't
Right.
see any
Right.
signs of the ship turning around. So
Yeah.
let's just assume it does happen at some point where Israel ceases to exist as a state. Hopefully, with minimum civilian casualties, maybe people leave and the state just kind of collapses on itself, and we don't see cities getting destroyed. I don't want to see millions of dead Israelis.
Mhm.
I don't want to see. I don't want to see
Yeah.
anybody die.
Right.
And so like people that would want to say that I'm a Putin shill or a Palestinian Hamas supporting terrorist. It's not true. I just don't want anybody to die unnecessarily. And I hate to see all
Yeah.
this unnecessary destruction.
Yeah. No,
But
absolutely no desire to see mass civilian casualties in Israel.
Right.
For their sake, and those are people. I think many of them, the great majority are terribly misguided. But
Hmm.
probably in a lot of other ways in their lives are decent people, take care of their families,
Yeah.
whatever.
And
They're not so different from you and me.
right, right. And
Um,
just think, if
right.
I was born in Israel, with that education, within that society, I'd like to think that I would be one of the dissidents and break free, but who knows? It's just
They're very few,
they're
right?
right. It's just an unfortunate state, and and I sympathize with them as well. Um, but that being said, if the state of Israel does collapse and break apart, I think it will be better for the world. I hope it happens peacefully though, or
Yeah.
there's some or Israel can exist if it's able to respect the boundaries and give the Palestinians some type of form of their own statehood and autonomy. That's obviously
Um,
would be the best, but it just doesn't seem like that's
yeah.
possible.
Right. Well, it's not going to be peaceful. I just hope that it's not catastrophic, not cataclysmic. It doesn't lead to World War III. And
Mhm.
but it's
But
it's
if I
just
was a
can't. There's
betting
no way that it's
man,
going to be peaceful. But let's just hope for yeah, for the least possible, number of deaths
right? Yeah.
to attain that end.
Amen. Yeah, but if I was a betting man, I do not expect this to end peacefully in any way. I expect it to be more on the catastrophic side.
Yeah.
That's just
Yeah. Well, I think
so.
that's reasonable. I guess I would say the same. Yeah, I do
Mhm.
say the same.
Okay. I guess we can end it there. Let's
Okay.
just pray that we don't go nuclear ever. And
Yeah.
cooler heads do prevail. But it's getting scarier. I think this weekend things just ratcheted it up a
Right.
big notch on both
Yeah.
fronts.
Well, yeah. Well,
Um,
that's again just an example of all the things that can go wrong. Um, like this attackums, who knows what they're actually were targeting. But when you do something like that, and you're sending missiles over a city, things like that can happen, right?
mm,
And things always
crazy.
go wrong in war.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, at least we got Biden at the wheel, so we can
Yeah,
sleep sound.
sleep soundly at night, right?
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Dad. We'll end it there. Okay. Bye bye.
Right.